I wish you had just died. My husband, Stephen, said this in front of me, sounding genuinely disappointed. Apparently, I had an accident recently. I don't remember the moment of the accident. When I regained consciousness, I found myself in a hospital bed, but my body had suffered severe injuries, and the doctor told me that I would likely be bedridden for the rest of my life. Bedridden for the rest of my life. Who's going to take care of my son? What about my mom? And who will support Stephen? I couldn't stop my thoughts from spiraling downward. Then Stephen appeared before me. I thought he had come to visit me, but his first words were, "If you had died, I would have gotten life insurance, and I could finally buy that luxury car I wanted." He walked over to my bed and looked out the window. I could only see the white clouds drifting peacefully through the sky. You don't want to live the rest of your life bedridden, do you? How about you take a little jump from here? He pointed toward the window as he said it. I could only tremble in fear, because my hospital room was on the 6th floor. Was he suggesting that My name is Karen, and I'm 41 years old. My mom is a renowned sports trainer, and I work alongside her as a trainer too. It hasn't been easy working with her. At first, I often clashed with my strict mom, but over time, I came to admire her dedication and hard work, and my respect for her only grew. While pursuing my career, I divorced my ex-husband. He had a bad habit of overspending, and after our son Andrew was born, it only got worse. We clashed, and after much discussion, we decided to part ways. I felt bad for Andrew, but continuing a future with my ex-husband had become impossible. After the divorce, he was persuaded by his parents and has been paying child support regularly. Andrew, despite the circumstances, grew up well, and now he's already 12 years old. So I live with Andrew and my mom at her house. One day, Mom made a suggestion. "Hey, you guys are fans of that team, right? I was thinking of going to say hello and watch one of their games. Would you like to come with me?" The team she was referring to was the soccer team where she used to work as a personal trainer, and both Andrew and I are huge fans. There was a reason behind her suggestion. She's now 66 years old and is nearing retirement. There's no set retirement age for sports trainers, so technically, they can keep working as long as they want. But most people retire around their 50s. It wasn't surprising that she decided to retire at her age, especially since few trainers continue working as long as she had. While some people encouraged her to keep going, saying she still had the energy, Mom, being the dedicated worker she was, found it hard to reconcile her current stamina with what she used to have in her youth. It was just like her to be so disciplined. Andrew and I were thrilled by her suggestion and quickly agreed. We decided to go see the soccer match together. On the day of the game, the atmosphere was electric. After a fierce back-and-forth battle, the team we were rooting for narrowly won. Andrew and I were both on the edge of our seats, cheering them on, and even after the game ended, we were still buzzing with excitement. That was amazing, especially Stephen's free kick at the end totally changed the game. Andrew and I were chatting away when Mom gently reminded us, "I'm glad you had fun, but should we go say hello now?" In all the excitement, I had completely forgotten the original plan. I sheepishly smiled at Mom, then grabbed Andrew's hand, and we headed toward the locker room to greet the players. When Mom called out from the door, the coach welcomed us inside. As we entered the locker room, several veteran players came over to Mom, expressing their regret at her retirement. Mom, in turn, greeted them warmly, smiling as she caught up with familiar faces she hadn't seen in years. Andrew and I watched from the sidelines, hearts pounding. We couldn't believe we were witnessing this up close. Listening to Mom and the players chat, I suddenly recognized a voice. Andrew and I exchanged glances, and I lifted him to my height. Sure enough, standing among the players was our favorite player. Stephen had known my mom for years, and their conversations seemed livelier than those she'd had with the other players. After everyone finished their greetings, Stephen promised Mom they'd catch up later and then walked away. When Mom finished talking to everyone, she turned to us. "You're fans of Stephen, right? I'm going to talk to him now. Want to come along?" Andrew and I, overjoyed, eagerly followed. Mom led us to a small cafe not far from the soccer stadium. It seemed to be a special place for the players, complete with private rooms. While we waited in one of the rooms, Stephen entered, wearing a hat and mask as a bit of a disguise. He looked just as cool in casual clothes as he did in his uniform. I thought we would just sit and listen while they chatted, but Stephen made an effort to include me in the conversation, and Andrew, who got Stephen's autograph, enjoyed chatting with him too. As the conversation flowed naturally, Stephen and I ended up exchanging contact information. I was thrilled to get my favorite player's number, but more than that, I felt like I'd made a new friend because we had such a great time talking. From then on, we stayed in touch. The feeling that I'd made a new friend was spot on, and we got along really well. Our conversations never dried up, and we ended up meeting up a few times after that. As time passed, we grew closer and closer, and Stephen's genuine care for Andrew was the deciding factor that led us to get married. Once we made the decision, I moved out of my family home, and the three of us, Stephen, Andrew, and I, began living together. Andrew was thrilled to live with Stephen and was excited about learning soccer from him every day. Mom also supported my remarriage, saying, "If it's Stephen, I know I can trust him to take care of you." She happily sent me off to start my new life. Filled with the hope of enjoying my days with Stephen, I began my life together with him. Despite his own busy schedule, Stephen was actively involved in both housework and parenting. On his days off, he'd cook for us or take Andrew and me to distant leisure spots. I would often think to myself, how lucky am I to be married to such a wonderful person? And Stephen would reply, "I feel the same way." I had a failed marriage behind me, but with Stephen, I felt sure things would be different. However, after our marriage, he started to change dramatically. He stopped helping with the housework and child rearing. I knew Stephen was busy. Being a professional soccer player meant that even on his days off, he had to take care of his body and train. So it seemed understandable that he wasn't helping with the chores. And of course, Stephen wasn't Andrew's biological father. I knew that his love for Andrew wouldn't be the same as mine, so it seemed understandable that he wasn't as involved in parenting. But things had been different before we got married. Stephen showed love toward Andrew, and Andrew was attached to him. That's why I decided to marry him. Yet now he suddenly wasn't involved at all. I felt betrayed. On top of that, he started staying out more. He stopped coming home to the house where the three of us lived together. Even when he promised to come back, he'd skip out for some last-minute party and not return. On good days, he'd at least let me know. But there were many nights when I'd prepare dinner only for him to walk through the door well past midnight. The man who had once cherished his family now seemed completely disinterested, as if the act of marrying had drained all of his care. And then his performance on the field began to decline. He was likely feeling pressure and stress, but that only made him stay away from home even more. When he did return, he started hurling insults at me. If I tried to talk to him, he'd snap, telling me not to come near him. If I left him alone, he'd accuse me of ignoring him and say I was acting high and mighty. There were nights when I wouldn't prepare dinner because I hadn't heard from him, and he'd lash out, calling me a lazy housewife. But when I did make dinner, he wouldn't even touch his fork, shouting that he couldn't eat such food, and flipping the plate over. I was at a complete loss for what to do. I kept telling myself that once his performance improved, he would return to being the kind man he once was. Right now, he was just overwhelmed with stress from being on the verge of getting cut from the team. I thought I could endure it, but lately, the question, "Why am I the only one who has to suffer this much?" had been weighing heavily on my heart. Then one day, it happened. I was on my way to the nearby supermarket to buy ingredients for Andrew's requested beef stew. On the way, there was a pedestrian crossing with very little foot traffic. When you get caught at that signal, it takes a while to change. And unfortunately, I was stuck waiting. While I stood there, I mentally added dish soap and toilet paper to my shopping list and absent-mindedly watched the cars pass by. Suddenly, I heard footsteps approaching from behind. "Looks like we're both unlucky to get stuck at this light," I thought, just before I felt a jolt from behind, a hard push against my back. Before I realized what was happening, my feet moved forward, my body tilted, and I was being pushed into the street. By the time I realized what was happening, my body had already been thrown into the street. Beep. The blaring sound of a car horn was the last thing I heard before my consciousness was swallowed by darkness. The next thing I saw was pure white. I was staring up at the ceiling of a hospital room. Seeing the flurry of activity around me, I realized that something terrible had happened. In the midst of my confusion, a doctor explained what had happened. Apparently, I had been hit by a car and had come dangerously close to death. Luckily, I had been rushed into surgery, and my life was spared. However, the doctor told me that there was a high chance I would never be able to move my lower body again. There was a slim hope that I might be able to move in a wheelchair, but the likelihood of becoming bedridden was much higher. I had no memory of the accident, and suddenly being told I might be bedridden felt like something out of a nightmare. Honestly, I wanted to believe it was just a bad dream, but the pain all over my body forced me to accept it as my harsh reality. The beef stew. My quiet words echoed sadly in the hospital room. That was all I could think about. I couldn't even check to see if the ingredients were safe, nor could I stand up. For a moment, I wondered how Andrew was doing. Given Stephen's recent behavior, it seemed unlikely that he was taking care of him. I began to worry that he might be all alone at home. I called home, and Andrew answered. "I'm okay, Mom. Grandma's here with me, so don't worry," he reassured me, soothing my worries. He then told me he'd come visit soon and hung up. A few minutes later, he arrived at the hospital. It turned out that while I was away, my mom had come over to take care of Andrew after hearing about my accident. Andrew also explained that the reason she didn't come with him was because she was busy at home preparing things for my extended stay in the hospital. When I apologized to Andrew for not being able to keep my promise, he tearfully responded, "I'm just glad you're alive, Mom." Seeing his tears, I realized that I was his only parent, and I needed to be strong for him. As the doctor had warned, I might be facing a future where I would be bedridden, but no matter what, I resolved that I would find a way to ensure that Andrew would be happy. While I was talking with Andrew, there was a knock on the door. I thought it was the nurse, and responded, "Come in." To my surprise, Stephen walked into the room. I was overjoyed that Stephen had come to see me and asked, "You came?" There was no response. Without even acknowledging Andrew, Stephen glared at me with a smug look and began speaking. "I've arranged to sell your family land for $1 million. The sudden confession left my mind blank. He continued, And about the accident, it was really unfortunate. But from my perspective, I should be thanking you. Good thing I made myself the beneficiary of the insurance policy. There's this luxury car I've been wanting. I was in shock. I never imagined he could stoop this low. Stephen was no longer the man I once admired. He had become someone completely different. With a devilish grin, he leaned in and whispered to me, "But you know what would have been even better? If it had been a life insurance payout instead. There's still time for that, isn't there? You could just end it now, say you couldn't bear the thought of a life bedridden." Surprisingly, my heart remained calm. Despite having my husband blatantly tell me that he wished I had died, I didn't feel sadness. All I felt was resignation that this was exactly the kind of person Stephen had become. Suddenly, Andrew, having heard everything, shouted, "An eye for an eye," and stormed out of the room. Stephen glanced at Andrew, laughing mockingly. He says something dramatic and runs out. What does a kid like that think he can do? He's going to take back the land from you, I replied. He narrowed his eyes at me, trying to decide whether to chase after Andrew or stay and listen to me. It seemed like his internal scale was tilting toward Andrew because his feet shifted toward the door. Andrew told me, he suspects that you only married me for my mother's land, I said. Stephen froze in place. Sensing this was my chance, I continued. He started noticing when you kept bringing him to my parents' house. Even though you treated me horribly at home, you were always so kind to Mom. That's when he started observing you, wondering what you were really up to. Then, Andrew saw you sneaking into Mom's private room multiple times. He said he caught you rummaging through drawers, and at first, he thought you were just after bank accounts or something. But when you didn't take anything, it puzzled him. Stephen's toes began to tap rhythmically, a clear sign of his growing agitation. The sound echoed loudly in the otherwise quiet hospital room. Do you remember that time when Andrew, trying to help out, vacuumed the whole house? That's when he found it in your room, the deed to my family's land. Stephen froze completely. Andrew brought it to me, asking what it was. It had been in my father's room, but once I saw it, even I knew. Mom was in danger. That little brat. He slammed his foot down hard, twice, the sound booming in the room as he angrily stomped toward my bed. Call Andrew back. You can't do anything now, can you? His presence loomed over me, making my body tremble involuntarily, but I forced a smile. And what would calling him back accomplish? My mom already knows everything. Stephen snarled, just as he lunged toward my bed. That was when I pressed the nurse call button with all my might. Yes, how can I help? The sudden voice from the intercom caused Stephen to jump back in surprise. Help me, I cried out. Stephen growled, his voice low with fury. The nurse on the other end said they would come immediately, and within 2 seconds, a male nurse and 2 security guards burst into the room. What? How did they get here so fast? Stephen exclaimed. I turned to the nurse, puzzled, and asked, "Why did you come so quickly?" The nurse explained that several nearby rooms had reported hearing a man shouting in my room, with concerns that a child might be in danger. Realizing that who my husband was, the staff feared the situation might escalate, so they brought the security guards along for precaution. Stephen, now ignored by everyone, mumbled weak excuses like, "I was just feeling a little unwell," or "I was overwhelmed with grief over my wife's future." But his eyes were cold, betraying the true, dark emotions within him. Perhaps realizing that causing more trouble wouldn't work in his favor, Stephen allowed the guards to escort him out without further resistance. After he left, the room was filled with people, including the nurse, who had responded to my call. A lecture quickly followed. Call us as soon as things start to seem suspicious. Why do you keep saying things that provoke him? I apologized repeatedly. And once they saw that I hadn't been harmed, they reminded me several times to stay calm and rest. I did as they said, deciding to remain still for the time being. So much had happened in one day. And as I stayed still, a wave of overwhelming exhaustion washed over me. The room was eerily quiet now, the earlier commotion seeming like a distant memory. Before drifting off to sleep, I called Mom to tell her everything that had happened. Upon hearing the full story, she was deeply concerned and furious. Karen, Andrew stayed behind just to buy time, didn't he? He intentionally made Stephen angry to give Andrew a chance to escape. You can't even sit up by yourself. So why did you deliberately choose to put yourself at risk like that? Just press the nurse call button from the start. Yeah, well, I'm sorry. At that time, Andrew had rushed out of the hospital room to contact Mom. He had secretly recorded Stephen's confession on his smartphone, thrilled that he had solid evidence against him. But Andrew knew that if he made the call right outside the room, Stephen might catch him. So he sprinted straight to the crowded lobby on the first floor. However, Andrew was only 12 years old, fast for his age, but still no match for Stephen, a professional soccer player. Running straight would have been a disadvantage, Andrew thought, though I couldn't help but feel that wasn't true. The outcome was obvious, and the only way to buy time for Andrew was for me to distract Stephen, no matter what it took. That said, Mom was right. I could have called for the nurse or gathered help in some other way. Feeling down, I heard Mom sigh deeply before she said she was coming to the hospital. Then hung up, but I couldn't resist the drowsiness creeping over me, so I sent a message asking Mom to wake me when she arrived, and drifted off to sleep. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Stephen didn't come to the hospital until 4 days later, and this time, I was the one who called him. He arrived with a solemn expression on his face. There were no signs of him hurling insults or attacking me. He simply stood there, subdued. In the room with us was Mom. She gestured for Stephen to sit, then began to speak calmly. Her face was composed, with a soft smile on her lips, but her eyes remained icy, not a hint of warmth in them. Stephen, seemingly unable to face her, stood frozen near the chair, unable to sit. The signature was wrong. Do you understand what that means? Mom's tone was casual, as if discussing the weather, but it struck Stephen like a hammer. I saw a slight twitch in the corner of his eyes. The day Andrew told Mom and me about the real estate deed, Mom had realized the title was missing. Without hesitation, she called every real estate agent in the area, explaining that while her name and Stephen's name might appear together, she had no intention of selling the property. She asked them to contact her immediately if Stephen attempted to sell anything under her name. It turns out one agency did get a call from him. Confident after securing all the necessary paperwork and setting the bank account to his own, he had let his guard down and prematurely boasted to me about the sale. But the agent, following procedure, carefully reviewed each document. When they realized that Mom's signature didn't match and the authorization was fake, they nullified the contract because large sums were involved in the sale. The agency had taken extra care to verify even the smallest details. They sent a letter by mail stating that the contract was invalid and returning all the original documents. Since Stephen hadn't been home for a few days, he likely hadn't seen the envelope. If he had, there's no way he would have shown his face here today. Well, Carol, you're as sharp as ever. Rest assured, I had no intention of selling your land without your permission. Stephen's insincere attempt to brush things off left me speechless. This time, Mom furrowed her brow while Stephen, still smiling, started speaking again. It was just a joke, really. I knew it wouldn't sell. And in the end, it didn't. The property belongs to Carol. And nothing could be done. So no harm, right? Isn't that for the police to decide? Mom's voice was icy. You don't get arrested for a joke appraisal, Stephen chuckled, insisting that since the sale hadn't gone through, there was no crime. I stared at Stephen, my expression unwavering. Forgery of a power of attorney is a serious crime. Stephen's eyes widened, his smug smile disappearing. He blinked a few times, and then suddenly, his face crumpled as he began to sob. He spewed out excuses. It was just a joke. I didn't mean it. I'm desperate, all while clinging to the side of my bed. Please. You love me, don't you? Even at this point, Stephen still tried to invoke our relationship, pleading for mercy. Stephen. The word that came out of my mouth was softer than I had expected. I began to tell Stephen how much I had once loved him, how I had admired him, starting from when he was my favorite soccer player. I loved his bold and dynamic play, the way he stood out more than anyone else on the field. I recounted our first conversation at a coffee shop. Maybe Stephen had been kind to me back then because he was after my family's land. Still, I remembered how he had been so kind to both me and Andrew. When we were just nervous fans, talking to our idol, Stephen had made sure the conversation flowed, smiling at me often. Perhaps all the text messages he had sent were full of lies, but my feelings of joy had been real. The meals he cooked after we started living together, and even the moments when he sweated while playing with Andrew, weren't fake. I had truly loved him, even as evidence mounted and I realized that Stephen didn't love me in the same way. I continued to believe in him. You were my hero, more than you know. I adored you. By the time I finished speaking, tears were streaming down my cheeks, tears of sorrow for the man I had lost, Karen. Stephen's eyes were now filled with tears too. What have I done? It seemed my words had stirred a deep sense of regret within him. The desperate, self-serving Stephen who had been pleading just moments earlier was gone. Now he simply wept, fully aware of the gravity of his actions. Yet, no matter how much remorse he showed, I could no longer forgive him. I had waited for him for too long, and he had committed too many sins. Only the sound of his quiet sobs filled the silence between us. That stillness was abruptly broken by a knock on the door. The police had arrived. Contacted by Mom, the police had begun investigating the forged power of attorney and Stephen's suspicious comments about my insurance. They were now looking into whether my accident had been an intentional act. In the end, it was confirmed that it was Stephen who pushed me onto the road. He wasn't stupid, so there were no fingerprints found on the clothes I was wearing at the time of the accident. However, eyewitness reports, security camera footage, and most importantly, the viral spread on social media sealed his fate. Apparently, there was an oncoming car when I was hit. That car followed Stephen, and the passenger had been filming the entire time with their smartphone. They even captured the moment when Stephen put on gloves and removed his hood to hide his face before leaving the accident scene near a trash can. The person filming didn't know it was Stephen and reported the hit and run, asking for information on social media. Someone who knew Stephen recognized him, and from there, things spiraled out of control. While I was still in the hospital, Mom filed a police report, which finally allowed the police to act. They recovered the gloves, and it was quickly determined that they belonged to Stephen. A warrant was issued for his arrest, but over the past few days, he hadn't returned home, nor had he been to the gym, so we took the opportunity to summon him to the hospital. Mom and Andrew were watching from the window, keeping an eye on the police car downstairs. He's being escorted now, about to get in. Mom kept us updated on Steven's movements. What? Then suddenly, she gasped, "Oh my God, he ran away." I leaned forward instinctively at Mom's words. But the scene outside hadn't changed. According to Mom, just as Steven was about to get into the police car, he bolted, running out of the parking lot. There's a river near this hospital, and the entire parking area, including the nearby bridge, is surrounded by tall fences to prevent falls. Steven apparently climbed the fence on the bridge and tried to jump. The police caught up to him, pulled him down, and handcuffed him right there on the ground. This time, they finally managed to shove Steven into the police car and take him away from the hospital. He had been so calm, but suddenly he tried to jump. I wondered if he was feeling remorse. After that, time seemed to fly by. Steven was fired from his soccer team and faced trial for attempted murder against me, forging Mom's power of attorney, and other charges. During the trial, Steven sent multiple letters of apology to me, Andrew, and Mom. He cooperated during questioning, and his remorse was frequently reported in the media. However, the court handed down a much heavier sentence than expected. Experts revealed that Steven's actions were all calculated, aimed at garnering sympathy. They said everything, including the attempted jump from the bridge, was planned. The jump was meant to show that he was under enough stress and pressure to act impulsively, but in reality, he had no intention of actually jumping. He put one foot on the fence but didn't follow through, and only after the police pulled him down did he start to struggle and plead to let him jump. All of it was a ploy to reduce his sentence, and that shocked me. I empathized with his fans, who expressed sadness. Others were furious, feeling betrayed. He had trampled on not just us, but many other people's feelings as well. At this rate, he probably wouldn't find a place to work even after his prison sentence. Being a well-known figure, Steven's face had become even more recognizable. As for me, I continued my rehabilitation with the support of Mom and Andrew. The doctor had encouraged me to start rehab, and as I gradually worked at it, I was no longer bedridden, although I still couldn't move to a wheelchair without assistance. Compared to the days when I thought I'd never move on my own again, I felt remarkably free. I shared some of my rehab progress on social media, where I had previously posted as a sports trainer, thinking it might be helpful to others. The posts went viral once again. Some people even donated to support me. Comments like "keep going" and "I hope you find happiness" warmed my heart. There had been so many hardships, but knowing that there were so many people rooting for me made me incredibly happy. I owe everything to Andrew, who first noticed Steven's wrongdoing. I shudder to think what would have happened if Andrew hadn't figured things out and confided in me at that time. I probably would have been powerless against Steven, and we might have lost Mom's family property entirely. At the very least, I would have been in despair and unable to stay as optimistic as I am now. Andrew and Mom, who acted behind the scenes to protect me, are my true heroes. I feel like I need to repay them somehow, but it's a debt I'll likely never be able to fully repay, even if I spend my entire life trying. Despite the challenges, the three of us, Mom, Andrew, and I, became a family again. And I'm confident that no matter what obstacles come our way, we'll overcome them. After all, we're the best family anyone could ask for. I couldn't help but feel excited about the happiness that awaited the three of us in the future.
I won't give personal information to a fake mother. An unbelievable line came out of my son's wife's mouth, and I was speechless, my mind made up. Even when I asked, "Won't you regret this?" she replied with a mocking tone. No way. Well, there's nothing I can do. I'm not a weak woman who cowers at words. You've crossed a line you shouldn't have. My name is Mariah, and I'm about to turn 60. I lost my husband and raised 2 children with all my might. Fortunately, I've loved Japanese culture since I was young, and that led me to pursue the path of calligraphy. I became a licensed instructor in Japan and was able to support my family with my beloved calligraphy work. Life is unpredictable, so the 3 of us lived in a small apartment without luxury, practiced frugal living, and saved money every month. My eldest son, Simon, was an easy child when he was young, but as he grew older, I felt his emotional weakness. My daughter, Liddy, unlike her brother, grew into a spirited and lively girl. My hard-working daughter earned her tuition through part-time work without relying on me, graduated from college, got a job at her first-choice company, and is working enthusiastically. Simon was indecisive, and at 35, he still hadn't found a partner. I was worried, but being single for life is not uncommon these days. So I was careful not to pressure him about marriage. There are countless people who marry and become unhappy, so marriage does not necessarily equal happiness. Then, Simon brought his girlfriend home. My daughter and I were curious about what kind of girl she was, but we were taken aback because she was so different from what we had imagined. Of course, we shouldn't judge people by their appearance, but she seemed to weigh more than the 132-pound, slender Simon. Before Simon could introduce her, Gloriana said. He kept saying he wanted me to meet his mom, so here I am today. Nice to meet you. Normally, one would be nervous in front of a partner's parents, but Gloriana was calm. Also, it's common sense to call him Simon in front of his parents, even if you usually call him this guy. Am I just old-fashioned? When I served tea and cake, Gloriana ate the strawberry shortcake in 2 seconds, chugged the tea, and said, "More, please." After some chit-chat, my daughter asked, "Gloriana, what do you do for a living?" "Call me sister." That's a bit. My daughter probably didn't want to call her sister, and I felt the same way. Is Simon planning to marry this woman? Work? I'm not working now. I had an annoying senior who nagged me, so I choked him from behind, and I got fired. A red card is too harsh, don't you think? I was astonished, but I needed to teach her common sense as a working adult. Times have changed, and there are laws that prevent easy dismissal, but violence in the workplace can be grounds for immediate termination. Then Gloriana glared at Simon with a smile and slapped his shoulder. Hey, your mom took the side of my senior. You're just going to stay silent in her pinch? My son looked troubled and said nothing. I was worried about the future. After that, Gloriana often came to our house to hang out. She would casually open our fridge and eat ice cream, drink cola, and munch on the table snacks. My daughter and I were dumbfounded, but we hesitated to complain, fearing it would come back to us 100-fold. Eventually, my son moved out and started living on his own. Was it Gloriana who told him to live alone? Certainly, for her, living alone would make it easier to meet than living with his family. One day, as I placed a sheet of paper on the table and picked up my brush, my daughter asked, "What's this month's quote?" I used to write an inspiring quote every month and hang it on the wall. I wrote all at once. Be gentle as a spring breeze with people, and like a lion king against evil. Gloriana peeked in and exclaimed, "No way, that's incredibly good. You could be a pro, Mom." My daughter quickly glared at Gloriana with a scowl. She is a pro. Are you like a Japanese teacher or something? She's a calligrapher. You know, calligraphy? She's an instructor. I know that much. It's calligraphy, right? I was pleased with my daughter's desire to show off that her mother was an important person, but Gloriana didn't seem to listen much. I was forced to do it a bit in elementary school for cultural exchange, but I hated it. The teachers were so picky about the strokes, I wanted to throw ink on their heads. Gloriana's handwriting is bad, so you should learn from Mom. I think my son meant it casually, but at that moment, Gloriana glared at him with devilish, scary eyes and scolded him in a low voice. If you say something stupid again, a dropkick won't be enough. Don't get so mad. Gloriana laughed loudly, looking at the ceiling while watching TV. To put it nicely, she was powerful and hardy. To put it badly, she lacked grace. No, she was unreasonable, rude, rough, and crude, and I couldn't see her as a suitable wife for my son. I wanted to throw ink on her head. Gloriana was also overly familiar with my daughter, Liddy. Liddy, you're so thin. Are you eating properly? Gloriana, have you ever thought about dieting? I was taken aback, but Gloriana continued the conversation with a smile. How old is Liddy? I'm 28. I'm 30. If you talk back to me like that, even though you're younger, I'll put you in a bulldogging headlock. Bulldog? Yeah, people often say I look like a bulldog. Are you picking a fight? She might have meant it as humor, but neither my daughter nor I found it funny. One day, I called Simon home alone, and the three of us had a serious talk. Brother, I'll be clear, I'm against your marriage to Gloriana. If that's what this is about, I'm leaving. This is important. I thought I could trust anyone Simon or Liddy brought home, but Gloriana is beyond unreasonable. That's not true, she has her good points. Brother, you can't say anything to Gloriana, can you? It's pathetic. I had intended to choose my words carefully, but Liddy was straightforward. If your girlfriend is rude to Mom, you should warn her, normally. You have to tell her to shut up if she complains. You don't know Gloriana, so you can say that. If I tell her to shut up, I'll be in the hospital in 2 seconds. I believe that a couple where the woman is stronger than the man is ideal, but Gloriana's strength is excessive. Marriage is not just a matter between two people. Both families become relatives. I had planned to treat Simon's wife like my own child, but honestly, I have 0% confidence in getting along with Gloriana. A heavy silence lingered until Simon suddenly stood up. What's this? Everyone's bad-mouthing Gloriana. Everyone? Does that mean your friends are against her too? Yeah, they're all terrible, saying things like that's not right, and just practice with her. I couldn't help but think that his friends were right. A marriage blessed by many, including family and friends, is desirable. I wanted my son to reconsider, but he kept defending Gloriana. You don't even try to see her good side, just badmouth her. I'm fed up. We're not badmouthing her. Her parents are kind. They welcome me warmly whenever I visit, treat me to expensive steaks, and even took me to a 3-star Michelin restaurant. Is that what you mean by kindness, brother? I was as astonished as Liddy, but my son ranted on. Compared to her house, being at home is painful. If all we can do is have depressing conversations like this, I won't come anymore. It seemed that Simon couldn't keep a secret from Gloriana, and he had told her that my daughter and I were against the marriage. Gloriana came storming into the house with my son. I never dreamed that both mother and daughter would be bad-mouthing me. We're not bad-mouthing you. You're not the ones getting married, so stop interfering. Her tone became rough, and I thought this must be her true nature. Gloriana started to pick on Simon too. It's your fault for not speaking up properly. When Gloriana needed my child's body, I finally yelled. Stop it! People change when they meet someone of the opposite sex. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. Did I make a mistake in raising my son? I don't remember spoiling him. The teenage and 20s are times to train the mind and body, so I didn't indulge him. If you grow up without knowing hardship when you're young and remain weak-hearted, you'll complain even in a privileged environment. A strong-hearted person can thrive even when adversity is a daily occurrence. I wanted to raise a strong child, but Simon is weak. Gloriana complained to Liddy and me one-sidedly and left Simon behind. When Liddy started blaming Simon, he lost his temper.
A guy who takes his mother's side when his mother and girlfriend fight is the worst, isn't he? That's not good.
That's not true.
You don't care about how I feel, caught in the middle. Enough already.
Simon left too, and we didn't see him for a while. Then one day, something I never imagined happened. A postcard in the mailbox. It was printed with "We got married," and there was a photo of Simon and Gloriana, smiling and arm in arm. Had they finally married? I thought they must have had a ceremony just for the two of them and decided to at least send a congratulatory card as a parent. The postcard strangely didn't include the address of their new home. I called my son. When I talked to Simon, I learned that they hadn't held the ceremony just by themselves. He said they had a grand wedding with Gloriana's parents, relatives, friends, Simon's friends, and colleagues. I felt weak all over, and my knees began to tremble.
Do you realize what you've done?
If you're going to lecture me, I'll hang up. Without letting me know, they held the ceremony without inviting any relatives from the groom's side. Images of my relatives flashed before me, and I felt sad. I can't explain why I didn't invite them to Simon's wedding, and I can't face them anymore. Didn't Gloriana's parents object, thinking it was too much? An unreasonable child from unreasonable parents. Something inside me began to crumble. Then Gloriana came on the phone.
Put your hands on your chest and think hard about why you weren't invited to the wedding. But I'll take the card.
I want to bring wedding and moving gifts to your new home, so please tell me the address.
I won't give personal information to a fake model.
An unbelievable line came from my son's wife's mouth, and I was speechless, my mind made up. Even when I asked, "Are you sure you won't regret this?" she replied with a mocking voice, "No way." Well, then, it can't be helped. I'm not a weak woman who will cower at being spoken to like this. Put my son on. If you're going to lecture, forget it.
Put my son on now.
When I yelled loudly, Gloriana yelled back.
Don't act tough on the phone. If you yell again, I'll headbutt you.
Hello? I have something important to talk about, so come home.
If it's depressing, I don't want to hear it.
I have to give you the congratulatory card.
A card?
Hearing about the congratulatory card, my son said, "I'll come," and I felt even more pitiful. Since Simon might get angry and leave if he had to face Liddy's rapid-fire words, I talked to him alone. I wanted Simon and Liddy to become strong-minded people, so I didn't indulge them or allow selfishness during their teenage and 20s.
Enough with the old stories, where's the gift?
Since your father worked hard, I was able to save most of the money I earned from calligraphy. Simon's eyes sparkled as the conversation turned to money. I lived frugally and saved money, planning to surprise you with a large sum when you got married. Simon's smile grew, and he leaned forward. I saved $100,000 for you. My son's eyes widened in surprise, and he shouted with joy.
$100,000.
But you did something unthinkable by holding a wedding without telling your real mother.
What?
In my common sense, that's something that should never happen. So, you're no longer my son. You're a stranger. It would be rude to give a stranger such a large gift, so I decline. My son stood frozen with his mouth open for a few seconds, then burst into tears and ranted.
What are you talking about, stranger? Give me the $100,000.
My only child is my daughter, Liddy. Please leave.
Wait, Gloriana said she didn't want to invite you.
That's why you should only care about your new family. My firm attitude and cold voice left Simon flustered. The conversation is over. Please leave.
Stop talking like that. Are you saying you're cutting ties between parent and child?
Holding a wedding without telling me means you've already cut those ties, doesn't it?
No.
No matter what my son said, I wouldn't forgive him.
It's always been like this. Liddy, you always favor her.
I only have one child, so what do you mean by favoritism? Simon ran out of the house, crying and screaming. As planned, I moved from the apartment to a newly built house and lived comfortably with Liddy. Without meeting Gloriana, there was no stress. However, one day when I returned from shopping, Simon was in front of the house. I was surprised, moving to such a fine house. It looks sturdy and earthquake-resistant. Did you follow me? Please stop with the formal language. Give me the $100,000. It's not fair to favor only your sister. I have nothing to say to a stranger like you. Please leave. Then Liddy came home. Brother, you brought this on yourself. Reflect on it a little. Not that I'll forgive you even if you do. You plan to take $200,000, including my share? You're 35 and still expecting money from your parents. Don't you get it? Liddy's words were harsh. I intervened, fearing Simon might get angry. You chose this path. You chose your wife over your mother and sister. Holding a wedding in silence means just that. As Simon hung his head, unable to argue, a taxi pulled up, and Gloriana got out, shouting,
I wasn't invited, but I came. I thought you were being manipulated by your toxic mother and sister.
Gloriana ranted at Liddy and me like a machine gun.
Moving without telling your family? That's unbelievable.
Family? I looked back, then at Gloriana and Simon again. Who's talking about whose family?
Oh, you're going that way? Turning around dramatically to say you're talking to the wall, not me? You've watched too many movies. But I don't mind that kind of timing.
You said it. You called me a fake mother. So, I have no intention of giving wedding or moving gifts to a fake son and a fake daughter. Nitpicking, huh? If you nitpick, I'll counter with a neck chop before a dragon screw. You won't catch me with wordplay. I couldn't hold back and yelled.
Speak seriously when talking about important matters.
I warned you about yelling, or are you less intelligent than a crow? I'll call the police. Hearing the word police, Gloriana seemed a bit frightened but didn't give up.
Anyway, we'll take the $100,000.
With that, Simon and Gloriana left. I was disappointed by their desire for the $100,000, not because they wanted to keep family ties. It's a common plot in dramas, where the mother eventually gives in to emotion and hands over the money to her son. But that would never be for my son's benefit. If one goes astray, family should help, but if the spoiled thinking isn't cured, the same mistakes will surely be repeated. I had a strong resolve not to give even a single dollar. I want to treat good citizens with the gentleness and freshness of a spring breeze. But against evil, a spring breeze won't protect those dear to me. Against evil, against enemies, I must face them like a lion. My policy is to respond sincerely to sincere people, but to respond with strength to arrogant ones. The boomerang effect is scary. Given her attitude, Gloriana may have hurt many people in her life. Gloriana's parents seem to be on the brink of divorce. My son informed me, but it's none of our business. Gloriana's father, who seems to be 60, my age, had an affair with a woman 20 years younger. He had an inappropriate relationship with a female employee for years, and it seems his wife found out. Gloriana and her father argued during a marital fight, and her father ended up in the hospital. I was surprised that Simon's previous words were not a metaphor. She really did hit him. One night, Simon came crying. "What do you need?"
I apologize for everything so far. Please help me.
Help with what? Despite it being night, Simon raised his voice.
Family helps each other when in trouble, right?
Your voice is loud. It's a nuisance to the neighbors. Sure enough, a neighbor was looking out the window, so I reluctantly let Simon in.
Gloriana and my father were arguing, and when my father slapped Gloriana, she unbelievably countered with a German suplex.
German?
You wouldn't think Gloriana could do such a vivid bridge with that body, normally.
Liddy slammed the table with a bang, angry.
Speak seriously when you're asking for something serious. I'm not joking, I'm just flustered.
I don't know much about wrestling, so I don't know what a German suplex is, but I understood that Simon was confused.
My father hit the back of his head and is now hospitalized. He's lying about falling down the stairs, but the doctor is suspicious.
You have to tell the doctor this is an assault case.
Please stop.
After holding his head in his hands, my son spoke softly.
If my father can't work, our finances will be tight. Neither my mother nor Gloriana work, and my meager salary can't support us.
Then you must get Gloriana to work quickly. Though I worry if any company would hire her. Even with the sarcasm towards Gloriana, Simon didn't get angry.
Mom, I don't need $100,000. Just give me $10,000, please.
It's impossible. When I answered without hesitation, Simon said.
Understood. I'll bring Gloriana, and she'll apologize.
That won't happen.
I'll make her apologize.
If my son could make Gloriana apologize, I thought I might reconsider, my parental feelings getting the better of me. The next day, Simon really brought Gloriana. Gloriana, probably acting, looked solemn.
Please forgive my rudeness until now.
Lies, did you think you were being rude? For a moment, Gloriana glared at Liddy but quickly hung her head.
Please help our family. I beg you.
I refuse. I answered immediately, and Simon's face turned pale.
Mom!
As Gloriana tried to kneel, I spoke first. It's useless to grovel on the floor. Ignoring Gloriana's trembling humiliation, I said. When dealing with someone who's lived for 60 years, it's important not to underestimate them without knowing what hardships they've been through. Gloriana looked up at me. Did I look like just a gentle calligraphy teacher to you?
Even if you claim to be a mafia woman, I won't be intimidated. Gloriana!
I smiled wryly. A mafia woman? What a lack of imagination. It's not about that. I'm a patient person, but once I decide not to forgive, I can be utterly cold-hearted. Understand?
Isn't family supposed to help each other in times of trouble?
Liddy shook her head in disbelief. Gloriana, you crossed a line you shouldn't have. Please leave. Realizing she wouldn't be forgiven, Gloriana lashed out at Simon.
It's your fault for having zero persuasiveness and credibility. It's your fault for not being patient. You promised to endure whatever was said.
Take it outside, you're unbearable.
Cold-hearted sister. You should have given her a pile driver on the concrete, not on the carpet.
Feeling threatened, Simon ran out of the house, and Gloriana chased after him. I didn't stop them. I heard my son's screams from outside, but I ignored them. Simon apparently divorced Gloriana. And Gloriana's parents also divorced. Truly, a family torn apart. My heart ached. If I laughed at others' tragedies, I wouldn't escape the boomerang effect either. My son came to the house again, but I spoke to him at the entrance and didn't let him in.
This is hard to say, but can I live here with you?
It's impossible. Simon hung his head at my immediate response. Indulging him now would be meaningless. After that, I heard nothing from Simon. Days like a storm continued, but now, both Liddy and I enjoy clear skies every day. One day, Liddy said she would bring her current boyfriend over, and I felt a pang of anxiety. If her boyfriend turned out to be another rude and unreasonable man, I would feel it was fate. However, the young man my daughter brought was sensible and decent. I breathed a sigh of relief.